All right, welcome back to the listener's commentary on the book of Revelation. In this recording, we're going to be looking at Revelation chapter 21 all the way down to 22 verse 5. And the reason we got to put that whole section together is the chapter break is unfortunate because it's one long picture of sort of like the grand finale of the story of Revelation, the story of the Bible. It is the description of the new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven. And so this is like the grand climax to Revelation and the conclusion to the entire story of the Bible. And it is a beautiful and fitting conclusion. And to keep the context in mind, just recall that in chapters 16 through 20 of the book of Revelation, John presented us with the bringing of justice into the world. So God's justice has been poured out, evil has been eradicated, and God's enemies have been vanquished once and for all. That's chapters 16 through 20. So now at this point of chapter 21, what we're ready for is the happily ever after, if you will. It is the glorious renewing of creation and the union of heaven and earth once again. So that's where we arrive when we open up to Revelation chapter 21. Verse 1 says this, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there is no longer any sea." And so John, now in kind of culmination of the long prophetic hope, John sees everything being worked out and a new heaven and a new earth, the first heaven, first earth gone. And this is the long prophetic hope. You hear it in Isaiah chapter 65, verse 17, which says, "For behold, I create a new heavens and a new earth, and the former things will not be remembered or come to mind." They're gone. We're bringing all things new. 2 Peter really captures this promise in Isaiah 65, 2 Peter 3:13, and says, "But according to his promise, we're looking for a new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells, in which everything is made right." Well, that's what John is seeing here in the vision of Revelation. And this is our destiny. It is resurrection and life on a new earth and with a new heavens. That's what John sees. It is the grand culmination of the biblical story where God makes all things new. Notice at the end of verse 1, it says there's no longer any sea. Why is that? Why no longer any sea? Well, because in ancient thinking, including ancient Jewish thinking, the sea was a place of chaos. In fact, it was typically even viewed as like a portal to the underworld. And that's why in Revelation, one of the dragon's henchmen is the beast out of the sea. And so now here in the climax of the story, as John is being shown the removal of evil and chaos, well, in the symbolism of the book, that includes the sea. So there is no longer any sea in the culmination to the story because chaos and evil have been removed and eliminated. And so John sees a new heavens and a new earth. And then he says in verse 2, "And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband." It's wedding day, if you will. Recall that in chapter 19, verse 7, there God's people are described as the bride ready for the wedding. Well, now it's wedding day. That's where we've arrived. And she's here adorned for her husband. And if you recall again in chapter 19, verse 7, there she was wearing wedding clothes, and the wedding clothes were fine linen, which then John explains is the righteous deeds of the saints, the righteous acts of God's people. And so here we have wedding day. With God's enemies vanquished and evil eliminated, it's time for God's people now to be united with God himself. And now God's people are viewed here as a city, the holy city, the new Jerusalem, with the evil city, the city of man, Babylon, gone. Now the city of God is full of his people and is ready for wedding day when God and his people will be united forever. And notice that it's not God's people going up into heaven, but the new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven. And so, just as it was at the beginning of the biblical story, where heaven and earth were one and God walked with mankind in the garden, so it will be again, the union of heaven and earth. And John writes in verse 3, I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the tabernacle. That is the tent. That's what tabernacle literally means. It's tent. And the reason we refer to the temple tabernacle in the Old Testament as a tabernacle is because it was a tent. So it's the dwelling place. It's the tent. Behold, the tabernacle, the dwelling place of God is among the people, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be among them. There are some lines in this vision of the New Jerusalem that we just need to sit with and savor. And to me, this seems like one of them. God himself will dwell among them. It is the dwelling place of God is among them. He will dwell among them, and God himself will be among them. 3 times in this one verse, that's emphasized for us that God's going to dwell with us, that our heart's desire and God's heart's desire is now fulfilled. Union with God, what we were made for and what we severed ourselves from in the beginning by our disloyalty and rebellion, now has been reclaimed and restored, and God will be among us. He will dwell with his people. And then the loud voice from the throne continues, and it says, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. He will be among them, and like a father wiping the tears from their eyes, he removes the pain and the sorrow. And there will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning or crying or pain. Why? Because the first things have passed away. The fantasy writer J.R.R. Tolkien said that the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus means that one day everything sad will come untrue. Catch that. Everything sad will come untrue. That's what John is describing. Everything sad being removed and being made untrue as the first things are passed away, wiped away. Dostoevsky in his Brothers Karamazov puts it like this. He says, I believe, like a child, that suffering will be healed and made up for, that all the humiliating absurdity of human contradictions will vanish like a pitiful mirage, that in the world's finale, at the moment of eternal harmony, something so precious will come to pass that it will suffice for all hearts, for the comforting of all resentments, for the atonement of all the crimes of humanity, for all the blood that has been shed, that it will make it not only possible to forgive, but to justify all that has happened. And while Dostoevsky is describing this in his Brothers Karamazov, that's sort of what John is picturing here, that there's going to come this moment when all of a sudden it's like what God has achieved and accomplished in and through Jesus, his son, and the glorious future that he has prepared for his people will all of a sudden make the entire rest of the story make sense, and will make the rest of the story good and beautiful, because the conclusion is so beautiful and so beyond our wildest imaginations. And then verse 5 says, he who sits on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. And he said to John, write, for these things are faithful and true. Write them down. Let people know. Even though life is hard, for the original audience, even though there's persecution and oppression and suffering, someday, at the grand finale of the story, all things will be made new, and it will be worth it all. And then he said to me, verse 6, it's done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, Alpha and Omega, the first and last letter of the Greek alphabet. It would be like saying, I am the A and the Z. I'm the beginning and the end. I give water to the one who thirsts from the spring of the water of life without cost, freely, generously giving the water of life from this eternal spring that gives the kind of life human beings long for and crave. To the one who overcomes will inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son, my child. And recall this idea of overcoming way back at the beginning of Revelation in the individual messages to the seven churches. Each of them ended with that, to the one who overcomes, and then some promise. Well, here, coming all the way back around at the end of the story of Revelation, that's the promise. The one who overcomes will inherit all these good, right, and beautiful things. And I will be his God, and he will be my child. But, verse 8, for the cowardly and the unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and the sexually immoral persons and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. In other words, all those kinds of people, and it's just a representative sample, they go where the enemies of God go. They don't want God. They've rejected God and his ways, and so they are banished from God's dwelling place, from God's new city. Then, verse 9, one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of the seven last plagues, the ones we met back in chapter 16, came and spoke with me, saying, Come here, and I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. So just like how John was summoned in chapter 17 by one of these seven angels to come and see Babylon, the wicked city, well, now with the New Jerusalem, it's the same. Come, John, and I will show you the bride of the Lamb. And so John is now going to describe what he saw, and it's a glorious and picturesque description of the New Jerusalem. It's a description laden with symbolism and imagery that makes the reality being pictured greater than the picture itself. And so he's been summoned to see the bride of the Lamb. And verse 10 says, this angel carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain. Again, recall back in chapter 17 when John is going to be shown Babylon, the wicked city. Well, she was riding on a beast out in the desert, dry, dead, lifeless, the haunt of jackals. But here, with the bride of the Lamb, the New Jerusalem, here John is taken to a high mountain, beautiful and garden-like. And in the biblical mind, mountains were the very dwelling place of God. And so now John is taken to a high mountain to see the New Jerusalem, the bride of the Lamb. And he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, once again, coming down out of heaven from God. So coming from God, now coming to the new earth to be located there, having the glory of God. Her brilliance was like a valuable stone, like a stone of crystal clear jasper. And he goes on in the following verses and continues to describe this new Jerusalem and how beautiful she is. He says, it had a great and high wall with 12 gates, and at the 12 gates were 12 angels, and the names written on the gates, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel. And so now you have the 12 gates labeled with the names of the tribes of Israel. And there were 3 gates on the east, that is on the east side of the city, and 3 gates on the north, and 3 gates on the south, and 3 gates on the west. And so the city, we will see, is laid out in a perfect square, and it's got gates on each side equaling 12. And then the wall of the city had 12 foundation stones. And on the 12 foundation stones were the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. 12 tribes, 12 foundations, 12 apostles. Just like elsewhere in the New Testament, the apostles are the foundation for the people of God in Christ. You see that, for example, in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 19 and 20. In other words, this is the full people of God from both Old Covenant and New. The The people of God that had been faithful to Yahweh under the old covenant, 12 tribes. The people of God now built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets. The people of God in Christ under the new covenant. And the one who spoke with me, John goes on in verse 15, had a gold measuring rod to measure the city, its gates, and its walls. And the city is laid out as a square, and its length is as great as the width. And so it's a perfect square. And he measured the city with the rod, 12,000 stadia. Its length and width and height are equal. So it's 12,000 stadia long, 12,000 stadia wide, 12,000 stadia high. 12,000 stadia, if we're going to convert the amount, is roughly 1,400 miles or 2,200 kilometers. Massive city. But once again, this is imagery. And the reality is greater than the picture. Why 12,000 stadia? Well, 12 is the number for the tribes of Israel. 12 is the number of the apostles. 12 is a number that actually intends to communicate the people of God. And then you have 12 times 1,000. So it's the fullness of people of God. And there's a lot of them. That's the idea. It's 12,000 cubed. And notice that the city is a cube, a giant and perfect cube. Just like the Holy of Holies in the temple was God's dwelling place and was a perfect cube. Well, so too is the New Jerusalem a perfect cube. And so this is the whole city of God, all the people of God from both covenants, filling this beautiful, perfect city as a giant Holy of Holies. It's now the dwelling place of God, where God's presence is, and it's open to all of God's people. God dwells among us all. That's the point of the picture. God is here in this city, and the city itself is like the Holy of Holies, full of God's glorious presence. And he continued to measure, and he measured its wall, 144 cubits by human measurements, which is also angelic measurements. 144 cubits, again, is about 215 feet, but the meaning is more than the literal dimensions. 144 is 12 times 12. All of this intends to capture our imagination with a city so magnificent and so massive that all of God's people can dwell there, with God himself dwelling there among them. And not only that, this city, as John continues to describe what he saw, is stunning in its beauty and its opulence and its wealth. Look at verse 18. The material of the wall was jasper, and the city was made of pure gold, so perfect and pure that it's like clear glass. The foundation stones of the city were all decorated with every kind of precious stone. The first foundation stone was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, the 12th amethyst. And the 12 gates, well, they were made of 12 pearls. Each one of the gates was a single pearl. That's how massive this pearl is. And the street of the city was pure gold, once again, like transparent glass. Now, one of the key points of this description, with all these rare and precious stones listed off here and gold itself mentioned twice, one of the key points of all of this is to say that what was once rare and costly will then, in that final new city, will then be abundant and prevalent. That it won't be rare anymore. And not only does this communicate beauty and wealth, but these stones, well, they're the same kinds of stones that made up the breastplate of the high priest in the Old Testament. Why? Well, because all of God's people are priestly. God himself is now dwelling among them in a perfect cube city that's the Holy of Holies. And God's people now get to serve as priests. Their whole very city is priestly, because that's actually an essential part of the story. That's an essential part of what it means to be human. From the very beginning of the story, humans were set on earth, and earth was portrayed as like a temple, and humans were meant to be God's priests and viceroys as little kings and queens ruling over God's domain. And once again, in the new heavens and the new earth and the new Jerusalem, that's the way it will be again. All has been made new and restored. John goes on and says in verse 22, I saw no temple in the New Jerusalem, for the Lord God the Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. There's no temple because the whole city is God's dwelling place. And to the ancient readers, this would be like utterly striking. Every city had temples. Most cities had many temples. And the Jews in their Jerusalem, they prayed for the renewal of the temple. But John sees a city now so full of the presence of God that the city itself serves as its own Holy of Holies. And so no temple is needed. So there's no temple there because God himself and the Lamb, they're present there, and they are its temple. And the city has no need of the sun or of the moon to shine on it. Why? Because the glory of God has illuminated it, and its lamp is the Lamb. The light of God and the light of Jesus the Lamb, they illuminate the city. There's no darkness there. It's a thing of the past. And remember, in biblical theology, darkness summarizes confusion, falsehood, lies, immorality. Well, all of that is removed, and the city now is full of the light of God and the Lamb. And the nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it in the daytime, for there's no night there. Its gates will never be closed. City gates were closed at night for safety and security reasons, just like we lock our doors at night. But now, in the New Jerusalem, in this new earth where everything is renewed and perfect again, there's no need to shut and lock the doors ever because there's no danger and there's nothing to fear. And so the gates will never be closed. And they, that is the nations, will bring the glory and the honor of the nations into it, fulfilling once again this long promise of the nations now coming into the people of God and bringing their own glory, their own unique contribution into the holy city. And nothing unclean and no one who practices abomination and lying shall ever come into it, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb's book of life that we saw back in chapter 20 when books were open and then the book of life was open. Well, it's the Lamb's book of life. And those whose names are on that, they're welcomed into this new city and onto this new earth. But others, they're not. They're not allowed into it. And he showed me a river of the water of life, clear as crystal, coming from the throne of God. Notice that. The source of this river is God himself, his very own throne. This spring of the water of life flows forth from God. And it flows in the city, as John describes it, right down the middle of its street. So Main Street, New Jerusalem, has a river flowing down the middle of it. And on either side of the river was the tree of life. And so in the beginning of the story, there in the Garden of Eden, there was the tree of life. But because of Adam and Eve's rebellion, they were banished from the garden and not allowed to eat of that tree. But here in the New Jerusalem, there's a river flowing down the middle of the city. And on each side of the river, the tree of life grows there. And it bears 12 kinds of fruit, enough fruit for the people of God, all of them, yielding its fruit every month, all 12 months. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. In other words, all the nations, all the peoples from various nations who have come into the city of God, whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life, all the nations are healed by the tree of life and given life by the water of life that God provides. And then verse 3 here of chapter 22 says, and there will no longer be any curse. Just sit with that. No longer be any curse. The curse that has plagued the earth is removed. The curse of Genesis 3, that's the result of humankind's disloyalty and rebellion against their Creator. The curse is removed. There will no longer be any curse. It's done. It's gone. It's over. And the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in this city, and his bondservants will serve him, and they will see his face, and his name will be upon their foreheads. They will be marked as belonging to him, and they will see his face. Just hear that. Think about that. They will see his face. What wasn't possible due to the curse, now all of a sudden, God is going to allow his people in this new Jerusalem to see him, to see his face. And there will no longer be any night, and there will not have need of light of a lamp nor the light of the sun, because the Lord God will illuminate them, and they will reign forever and ever on the new earth in the new Jerusalem. What an incredible and beautiful portrayal of the destiny that God has planned for his people. In fact, as you read through that, I would encourage you just to go back thoughtfully, prayerfully, meditatively, read through this description once again. And for me, I know when I read through this, just thoughtfully, taking my time prayerfully, not trying to sort out all the details, but just letting the imagery wash over me. It's a bit overwhelming to think of the future that God has for us, and to think that someday heaven and earth will be united once again, and we will dwell with God, and he will dwell among us, and all that's wrong in the world will be removed, and everything will be made new, and he will wipe away every tear from our eyes. So whatever you're enduring or going through or challenging, wherever you're at, no matter how comfortable your life is or how difficult your life is, no matter how hard it is to stay faithful to Jesus, Revelation 21 and the first part of chapter 22 that describes what God has planned for us, it's here to draw our hearts forward and remind us that there's a world coming. There's a new heavens and new earth coming that is so far beyond our wildest imagination that it will satisfy all our longings. It will fulfill all our desires and all our dreams. Everything we've hoped for and longed for and wished for in this world someday will come true when the new heavens and the new earth and the new Jerusalem comes. Thanks for tuning into this session of the Listener's Commentary on the New Testament. The Listener's Commentary is a crowd-funded Bible teaching ministry that's made possible by the generosity of dozens and dozens of people just like you. So thanks a ton for your support. Thanks for making this commentary possible. And as we approach finishing off the New Testament portion of this commentary, all I can say is thank you. Thanks a ton for making this possible. People are using the commentary all around the world in ministry, in their own personal life. Their faith is being enhanced and deepened. And that is because of your generosity, your faithful support, both financially and in prayer. So thanks a ton for that. And if you want to join the team of supporters, you can do so by going to listenerscommentary.com. And you can click the Give button. It'll redirect you to a page, my page at World Family Mission, where you can set up a one-time, or you can click a little box that's make this monthly and make it a monthly recurring donation. Thanks a ton for your support.